Okay, perfect. So climate change is accepted as one of the biggest threats for urban environments nowadays. In the face of climate change and increasing environmental, economic, and social pressures, sustainable development has become a strategic issue for cities in Europe and around the world. Therefore, we are searching for solutions that can help to limit the impacts of climate change. But what if we could provide solutions that offer multiple benefits across a range of sustainability challenges that the cities are facing? As cities have started to take action on climate change and sustainability, it has become clear that some of the most effective responses are those that have multiple benefits, such as the nature-based solutions. The term was coined in the European Union and is an umbrella term for a number of different approaches that use nature to improve urban sustainability. This is why nature-based solutions are an increasingly popular means for tackling these challenges. The idea that we work with nature to improve our cities is now seen as vital. Nature-based solutions have at their core the support of biodiversity within the urban environments. Additionally, they provide both adaptation and mitigation measures. Nature-based solutions simultaneously support human well-being needs and biodiversity benefits through actions of protection, restoration, and sustainable management. The definition serves as a basis for issue-specific and infrastructure-specific approaches to be leveraged as solutions. This is also the definition of the International Union for Conservation of Nature. The European Union defined nature-based solutions as solutions that are inspired and supported by nature, are cost-effective, provide environmental, social, and economic benefits, and help build resilience. They bring more and more diverse nature and natural features into cities, landscapes, and seascapes through locally adapted, resource-efficient, and systemic interventions.
So I'm going to continue with the next slides. Nature-based solutions can also be seen as a democratic entry point to address many urban challenges in cities simultaneously. Through a participatory approach that would deal, for example, with flooding, like the images we saw in the previous slide. At the same time, this approach could deal with heat waves or improve the air quality in the cities, or improve the quality of the water bodies, and deal with the depletion of natural resources with using the same intervention. Now, about the co-design of nature-based solutions. Co-design of nature-based solutions is an approach that is interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and transdisciplinary at the same time. So it involves a lot of different stakeholders. It involves the decision makers of the city, practitioners or consultants on urban issues, planners, scientists from different fields, and of course the communities of interest and communities of influence in an urban area. The process of a nature-based solutions co-design can have, of course, various outcomes. However, the fact that it can deal with the behavioral inflexibility of all these actors is the core, most important function it can, or result it can bring, because this is recognized from many researchers as the core issue of climate change, and why stakeholders or cities cannot deal with climate change management issues. So co-design can be a core way to deal with this behavioral inflexibility, and the different actors can become more flexible and more willing to act towards climate change. Now, beyond the participation and the co-design issues, where we need to ensure that the design solutions we propose are transparent, of course, and appealing to all stakeholders so that they feel the ownership to support these solutions. We need to ensure that all stakeholders and the solutions we propose promote intergenerational equity, conservation of biodiversity, and promote ecological integrity as well. So it's not only about the stakeholders who participate at this time and propose the solutions at this time, but the solutions have to have a much wider impact. I'm going to present one example from a study in Costa Rica. It has to do with water management in cities. In this slide, we have a few words about stormwater management. Which is recognized as an important tool for adapting to climate change. Because of course, with the heavier rainfall that we deal due to climate change, being able to manage this stormwater runoff in the cities is crucial. Nature-based solutions are key interventions that can support us to deal with the stormwater runoff. And actually, by using them as circular solutions, we can turn this risk to a valuable resource in the city. So we could probably harvest, treat through the nature-based solutions and reuse the water that we collect, and have additional benefits apart from flood risk reduction. We could have urban greening, microclimate regulation, and recharge of the aquifer. Going to the case study now, it is a study from Maria Perez Rubi and Jocelyn Hack that was published in 2021. And it's the co-design of experimental nature-based solutions for decentralized dry weather runoff, means gray water, in Central America, in Costa Rica. The issue in this settlement is that because of the lack of drainage infrastructure in the settlement, the gray water, the water that is used from the kitchens and other uses in the households, doesn't get treated before it is thrown in the river. So this deals with means pollution in the urban environment and, of course, polluted water resources. The design approach that the researchers followed is actually to involve the government and all the organizations involved in the rainwater and wastewater issue in the city, as well as the communities, to design together solutions, different solutions, to see how they can deal with these issues. So the approach that we see here took place from November 2019 until March 2020. And it involved meetings, many meetings. The first ones were related to framing the problems. Then they went on to proposing solutions for solving the problems. And then they systematized together design solutions, the nature-based solutions, actually, that could deal with the issues. And eventually, luckily, these issues were implemented. So we can see later on, we'll see the result. In the next slide, we see part of the process that was related to the mapping of the area. We see the maps here that are related to the public space. Actually, it's all structured along the road infrastructure. We see which areas are green, which land around the streets where the water flows is vacant, or are properties that are undeveloped. And we see also some interesting information like the gutters, what's the condition of the gutters, small details that for this specific problem are very important. And of course, all the outlets and drainage infrastructure related to water in the city. Through the approach that we saw before, this participatory approach, after 1 year of all the meetings and interviews and workshops and all this delegation, the design team, researchers team with the government and the community concluded to these 3 approaches that are in the next slide. So they ended up in managing to implement constructed wetlands, small constructed wetlands on the sidewalks in front of the houses, where the water coming from the house can be treated at the first as a first step, and then continue towards the river in a cleaner format, let's say, in a cleaner form. This is in the household level. Then in the neighborhood level, they implemented some bioretention areas, also next to the streets, where water can be collected from the public space and be filtered. And then finally, next to the river, they created an infiltration area where the previously treated water can be treated again. So we have a better quality water that leads to the, that is given to the, back to the river. So I think this is for me with the example from Costa Rica. If you want, we can discuss it more later. But now Amy has some additional slides to conclude.
So after presenting the nature-based solutions within their connection to adaptation examples in a participatory project, it is important to highlight that what we need in order for these ideas and practices to succeed is not just frameworks and policies. What we need, what is needed is not just to make spaces, but to make change. Design of urban space is a competition field, as well as a participation chance. All stakeholders should rethink existing practices, should realize their position in reproducing space, and should be engaged to create new ways of design. In the end, should design be a form of activism? We need to come up with tools that are bottom-up invented to provide the local knowledge in the design process, to ensure justice within all parts, and to expand environmental awareness in ways that tackle climate change and enable change. So thank you, and that was from us.
Thank you very much, Efthymia and Alexandra. I suggest we go on with Nesrine Saadaoui. Nesrine, can you hear us? Hi. Can you please speak a little bit, if we can check the microphone to check if we can hear you?
You hear me or not?
Yes. Perfect. So welcome, Nessrine from the Carthage University of Tunisia. I give you, okay, you can start whenever you want, and maybe share your screen if you got PowerPoint.
It's okay, I can start. Hello, I'm Nesrine Saadaoui, research master student in management of natural ecosystem and evaluation of their resource. Today I will present to you a research work entitled Participation as the main pillar of the climate change adaptation, case of the Kirkana archipelago, Tunisia. The plan of the presentation is as follows: introduction, subject area, Kirkana archipelago, methodology, results, discussion, and conclusion. The importance of the participatory approach is characterized by the involvement of the local population and stakeholders in decision making. This approach aims to identify the weaknesses and strengths of policies, which leads to sustainability. It's okay. Wetlands have a very important role in the human well-being through the ecosystem services that they provide. Climate change is the main factor of the ecosystem degradation. The Kirkana Islands are located in the Gulf of Gibbs on the eastern coast of Tunisia, with an area of approximately 150 kilometers. There are two inhabited islands named Shargi and Gharbi, with 18 villages. 18 villages and 12 inhabited islands. Kirkana archipelago is characterized by an arid Mediterranean climate. The annual average temperature is equal to 20.4 degrees, and the annual average precipitation is 213. The Kirkana archipelago is considered a sensitive and threatened ecological zone. Kirkana soil are shallow and very conducive to erosion due to its low topography and significant climate change. During winter, northerly and westerly winds are the source of storms, and with low pressure, they promote coastal erosion. The sabkha in the archipelago has increased by 20% since the 1950s due to climate and environmental factors. There are also subject to anthropogenic threats represented by irresponsible human activity like pollution and urbanization. As it's shown in the following maps, the sabkha in Karkana are coastal and cover 45% of the total surface. Their extension threatens the palm grove that represent the culture and the landscape heritage, which deserves the main landscape and the well-being of population. In this study, we will apply this approach, participatory approach, to study the impact of climate change and awareness of local population, and for proposed evaluation scenario. The methodology followed is divided to two parts: a social file survey with the local population. In the questionnaire, we focused on the social characterization of the interview, climate impact, value, and valuation suggestion, and an interview with a stockholder, the General Secretary of the Municipality of Kirkana, Mr. Nasser Barkaya. We asked him about plans, policies, and strategy for the management and valuation of the sabkha and the future projection. The social field survey is carried out from August 9 until August 26, since the archipelago is more populated during the summer period. 50 samples were taken from all the villages of the archipelago according to the number of the population of each village, as it's shown by the following table. The result of the random sampling show that the respondents are 58% men and 42% women. The most present age present age is between 50 and to 59 years of 36%. Follow the age cover 59 years of percentage of 28%. We have 54% of the respondents are permanent and 46 are temporary, since the survey is done during the summer vacation. As shown on the following graph, with equal frequency, we find respondents who have a higher and secondary level of education with a percentage of 46% for each. The sabkha in the wetland that undergoes a lot of variation depending on weather, climate, and anthropogenic factor. They survey revealed a very high percent of 94% who confirm that the sabkha varies according to season. The most significant variation is noted during the winter and no variation conceived in the spring. 50% rate the state of sabkha bad and 80% claim that it stays the same over the year. Most of the respondents notice that the sabkha is deteriorated since the 1990s and worsened after 2011. The climate has an action on the degradation of sabkha according to 19%, from which 24% of people see rise in sea level as one of the harmful action, and 24% other think drought and decreased rainfall. We have also the extension of the sabkha and the increases in salinity by a percentage of 18 for each. The impact of man on the variation of sabkha present 74% according to the population. There are several types of human impact on the degradation of sabkha. Pollution and urbanization are present in the first place according to the respondent. The question revealed that 86% of respondents are in favor of the valuation of sabkha in the archipelago. 56% think that it should be valued for the benefit of nature, and 44% see that the valuation should be for the good of a human being. There are several maintenance assessment proposal. Vegetation are the most proposed solution. We move now to the interview with the General Secretary and his answer. We asked him, how do you qualify the state of the sabkha of Kirkana? He said that the state of the sabkha is critical in Kirkana archipelago. Have the sabkha changed over the years? He said that the sabkha varies from season to season, especially in winter. It fills with water. Does climate change have an effect on their condition? He said that climate change has affected all ecosystem. Does man have an impact on it? He said that man has a negative impact on sabkha through several irresponsible activities. And do you have strategy for the management valuation of sabkha? He said that local groups do not have a clear strategy or policies for the weaknesses and the vulnerability of these areas. And he asked him, what are your future goals for 2030 in relation to the sabkha? He said that we have a Italian photovoltaic project proposal, but we didn't move forward in it. We crossed the answers of the respondent and the decision maker, and we found similar and different points. Both parts agree that the state of sabkha is bad. The variation according to season is true in the winter. We have climate change action, and we have the impact of human behavior. For the valuation suggestion, the local population have many suggestions for valuation, but the stockholder don't have any suggestion. For the voltaic project, who was proposed by the stockholder, but it is the least suggestion for the population. To conclude, the local population and decision maker of the sabkha, the delicate climate of the Kirkana archipelago, this makes the sabkha on the islands more sensitive and vulnerable. There is no agreement between and the enhancement of the sabkha between the population and the decision makers, whose proposal from the population are logical and feasible, like maintenance and vegetation. while the decision makers come up with a project with a large budget, and it is not executed until now. The idea of participatory approach is that the solution came out of the local population, which are more realistic and meet the needs of the society. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nesrine. And now we're going on and move from Tunisia to California, Los Angeles, with Nicole Lambrou. And please, sorry, Nicole, if anyone, of course, has got some questions to address to the panelists, please feel free to add it in the comments. If you want to address somebody, you can indicate this. And please keep your question to have a small discussion at the end of the session. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Nesrine. Can you stop your sharing so that I can start mine? Perfect, thank you. All right, I am in Southern California in LA, but the case study is in Northern California. Let me just move this out of the way. So thank you to the conference organizers for putting this event together and to the audience for taking the time to engage with some of this work that I've been involved with the past few years. So what I'm going to be presenting today is a small portion of my research as an urban planner and architect on the role of participation in shaping resilience design for climate risks. And as I said, it will be through a case study in Northern California. So spatial design responses to extreme weather events that have been catalyzed by climate change typically address environmental risks. And we have solutions like Alex and Amy were talking about earlier, from stormwater to rising sea levels, from extreme heat mitigation strategies to especially the rehabilitation of ecological processes. And in the US, specifically, recent catastrophic events have yielded a series of relatively high profile design proposals at the regional scale, right? So notably, these are responses such as those to Hurricane Sandy in New York, particularly the rebuilt by design proposals and those responding to Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. And these proposals really foreground ecological processes as part of urbanization. Okay. So there's a number of reasons why we have nature-based solutions and why participatory design matters. So some of those are to foster design innovation, experimentation, promote knowledge as a way to avoid perpetuating socio-spatial inequalities, as Angolovsky out of Barcelona tells us, and as a way to build social connections and policies and institutions for climate change adaptation. Now, for this study, I analyzed the Resilient by Design proposals for the Bay Area, Northern California. That was a competition that was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation and took place in 2018. And I was interested in what the process was like, what this aspect of participation was like, not so much what the design solutions were. So to that end, I documented and analyzed the visions each plan put forth for what they're calling an equitable climate resilient future, as well as the strategies proposed to achieve those visions. And in addition to documenting what was disclosed in the resilience documents themselves, I also interviewed several team members and, on the other side, the community representatives on how they felt about the design process and what that was like. So I will say that the environmental implications of climate change, particularly in Northern California in terms of sea level rise, are really central to each of the resilience design plans and stormwater abatement. There are a number of adaptation and mitigation strategies listed in all of the 9 proposals, and these are just a small sample to show the wide range of proposals we have. And you can see significant attention obviously was given to restoration efforts, also at different scales, all the way from the household up to the region. I'll also say that social resilience was also addressed in the plans with suggested policies ranging from things like access to housing, access to open space, to restored landscapes, And also a couple of proposals mentioned job training in green energy. And one of the major findings from the study is that where social resilience was actually directly tied to ecological restoration and ecological resilience, design proposals really did foreground equity concerns more concretely. However, based on interviews and on the content of the published plans, it is clear that teams, they were aware of the need to work closely with community stakeholders. They made great efforts to engage as many organizations and representatives as they could, but the efficacy of these of that kind of participatory process remains elusive. So while procedural justice, or what we might call participatory design and climate adaptation, is a critical foundation, I think we can agree, for an equitable outcome. And though public participation efforts can focus on being inclusive of marginalized and vulnerable populations, these processes of participation continue to be less than influential in giving those same populations the political power to enact and shape the climate adaptation decisions that they make, especially at the larger scales that involve neighborhoods, communities, and regions. Okay, so in other words, beyond questions of access to things like affordable housing and open, resilient coastlines, do these participatory design processes and proposals shift the power of decision-making to community members in a way that can persist into the future? And I would say, based on this work, overall, they do not. But with the time I have remaining, I do want to call attention to the beginnings of such aspirations in some aspects of some of the plans. For example, the Our Home group, they worked in Marin, in north of San Francisco. They worked with local residents and CBOs, community-based organizations, to create a citizens advisory board to become the leading entity driving the Resilient by Design effort. So according to an interview with one of the team architects, throughout the process, the team members, in partnership with these newly formed organizations, they worked on funding mechanisms that could resist gentrification, which I thought was a really interesting way to combine ecological restoration and social justice in a way. The Estuary Commons team also worked extensively to build relationships with community-based organizations, residents, and agencies to implement these adaptation strategies. And their work really highlighted community-led investments as pathways for socioeconomic equity, acknowledging the responsibility of designers themselves to really take a front role in shifting the conversation surrounding equitable design so that it incorporates these longer-term implementation strategies that could help shift these power relations on behalf, importantly, of vulnerable populations. And in an interview with this particular team, it became clear that, this is a quote, "Everyone understood that the issue of finance and governance need to lead. We can find solutions to the landscape problem, but we won't be able to do any of that unless we address underlying structures." So the People's Plan is another one that I want to call attention to, that also really framed equity as an issue beyond simply access to housing, beyond simply access to climate resilient open space, right? And the members of this team, interestingly, worked on strengthening community advocacy through what they kept referring to as eco-literacy, with this long-term vision of empowering individuals to really take ownership of implementing their vision of a climate just future that was framed by self-determination. So this particular plan, the People's Plan proposal, very interestingly, doesn't involve design in the traditional architectural or urban design sense of formulating a vision for a specific place or region. Instead, they propose this process here that can be adapted to the specific aspirations of a community that has been denied access to either general or specific planning as a result specifically of structural discrimination and oppression. So they say, rather than a site-specific element and component-based design, the Permaculture and Social Equity team, that was their name, proposed an unconventional approach, a social design process to build community capacity and eco-literacy to address the challenges of coastal adaptation and resilience planning, especially in vulnerable communities that have experienced generations of marginalization and exclusion. And according to an interview with one of the leading members of the team, the Resilient by Design competition organizers really resisted this proposal by questioning repeatedly who are the designers on the team and where exactly is the design. So there's quite a bit of resistance in thinking a little bit more abstractly about design as a process. So despite the fact that inequalities in these communities are a result of ongoing and structural discrimination, only 1/3 of the plans acknowledge structural racism or discrimination as a fundamental aspect of the resulting social and environmental injustices that are faced by the communities where these proposals take place. But I will say again, both the People's Plan and the Our Home plans, they really took on racism and discrimination directly. And they used the resilience proposals to expand how design could address equity through participatory design processes. One of the team members in a lead team member in the Our Home team specifically explained in an interview, as you can see in this quote, that the team kept returning to this question of whether resilience design continues to ask communities of color to keep enduring these inequalities. So one of the ways that this kind of asking already under-resourced populations to keep enduring takes place through labor, right? And specifically through the fact that participatory design asks for free labor. So we really do have to question who is able to participate in these processes because of that. And I say that in this context because the labor that's involved with implementing and maintaining resilient landscapes, whether such landscapes are driven by the design of ecosystems or whether we're talking about housing, recreational spaces, or some combination of these, is really an aspect of the resilience plans that receive the least attention, despite how central this question is in terms of equity. All 9 plans reference stewardship, either directly or indirectly. Several plans even foreground its importance in ongoing resilience work. None of the proposals, however, take on the question of stewardship and labor. And I keep saying stewardship because that is free labor in terms of enacting or hindering equity, even though stewardship is often framed as part of community engagement and participation. And for a just transition to take place, the question of labor cannot, at least from my perspective, focus solely on things like green jobs, but really should also consider the redistributive potential of work. So what would that look like? Aronoff writes about this quite a bit. Redistributive outcomes could include high wage jobs for the maintenance of green infrastructure and other nature-based solutions, a strengthening of public ownership that really opens paths up for under-resourced communities, carbon taxes that redistribute capital in a way that allows these frontline and fence-line communities to take the lead on how those funds are then implemented, right? These are all potential participatory design processes, quite frankly. And they're endeavors that really, I think, ought to be integrated with design processes and really centralizing labor, not just community engagement or participation within these mitigation and adaptation strategies, can move such projects from being reactive to being transformative. And the Resilient by Design plans as one such transformative path forward really, unfortunately, do little to negotiate this relationship, often sidelining labor and associated questions of education and mobility as a separate equity issue to address from environmental and climate-related work. Given the power of design to envision our futures rather than focusing solely on ecological design proposals, these design processes can and should enable just transitions by foregrounding a participatory framework that really is driven by questions of labor ownership and self-determination. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Can everybody hear me? Because we just changed the sound system, we got now a big speaker. We used to have an internal speaker of the laptop. Now we got a big speaker. Thank you very much. Now we're gonna go on with from California to France, Occitanie, and we're gonna go on with Norélia Voiseux from the University of Montpellier.
Bonjour Sylvain. Hello to everyone. I'm going to share my screen right now.
Just I saw a question on the chat, and it's perfect. I hope we will have time at the end of the session for the discussion. So if anybody else want to ask a question, and maybe we will have questions as well from the audience here in the room. So I hope that we'll get some minutes at the end of the session. So please, Norélia Voiseux, c'est à toi.
I'm going to turn my camera off because my internet connection is not very good. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. Okay, so good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for inviting me to this seminar. I am Norélia. I am a researcher at the University of Montpellier in France. It's a pleasure for me to present the research project called AATRE, an agora for the co-construction of land resilience with Occitanian citizens. First, to understand the theoretical background of this research project, we have to refer to the published literature on public participation, especially in the area of infrastructure projects and land planning. The first point to be noted is that mechanisms for public participation in decision-making are generally more a matter of communication, often just a public consultation, but almost never a co-construction of decisions with citizens. At the same time, the social acceptability of decisions and projects has become an important issue because citizens are more and more attentive to be involved into the public decision-making process, especially on environmental and social issues. So there is a growing social demand with new forms of environmental democracy. And more critics point out the inadequacy of participation mechanisms because of the low number or even the absence of certain profiles. Some of them ask for modernized processes that would make participation more effective and more inclusive, and also suggest that the use of digital technology could overcome some of these limitations. On this basis, a first study was conducted in 2017 to design and test an experimental digital consultation platform called eDébat. This research pilot project was built in collaboration with an energy company and was applied to a Mediterranean offshore wind farm. eDébat has been tested during the pre-project consultation, 1 year before the official public inquiry. It helped to open a direct dialogue between the company and the public during the preliminary design phase and allowed citizens to make proposals for the final draft of the project. This research provided an opportunity to analyze the conditions of digital participation. It has showed many advantages of digital technology in the public participation process. And it also revealed that citizens' proposals were taken into account in the construction of the project, especially on environmental issues. This experimentation helped to identify some of the contributions resulting from digital technology in terms of information, transparency, and traceability. It also helped to explore few elements from the complementarity between face-to-face and digital debate mechanisms. However, this result relied on the cooperation of the company and also an implementation of the platform at the early stage of the project. With the financial support of the Occitania region, the AATRE project was born to develop these first results in order to achieve a more efficient system of public participation, especially in the planning and management of coastal territories. During this 3-year program, a research team will continue to experiment new methods and tools, which could improve dialogue between citizens and decision makers. The project has 2 main areas of work. The first one consists to offer assistance and expertise to territory planners in order to help them develop innovative and hybrid participation mechanisms during their project development. And the second one involved the creation of a living lab that we decided to call an agora, because it may be an open space for discussions and debates on issues relating to planning and environmental matters, including decision makers, politics, and citizens. This project takes roots in different research fields, such as territory planning, coastal risks and issues, and of course, public participation in decision-making processes. It involves researchers specialized in various fields of research like geography, sociology, territorial management, cognitive psychology, or linguistics. The project team is composed of researchers from different specialist fields and also experts with various technical skills, particularly in the area of public participation. These practitioners will provide us a methodological support for animation and hybridization of the participation mechanisms, which will be tested on the ground. Through that project, we want to address this research question: how participation mechanisms could allow citizens to be more engaged in territorial projects, especially those dealing with coastal and marine issues around environmental impacts. We are going to test 3 specific hypotheses. One, when citizens are involved in the first stages of the project, environmental issues may receive better consideration from decision makers. 2, conventional and digital tools of participation have different but complementary effects. And 3, a dedicated place for participation in coastal development projects may facilitate a constructive and inclusive debate about planning and ecological transition. We are going to use an action research methodology, a long-term presence on the ground, developing interaction with regional and local actors, and the choice of different fields of study to adopt an exploratory and experimental approach. Our data will be produced by the interactions between citizens and decision makers, and this research will combine qualitative and quantitative methods and approaches. Our case studies correspond to different development and planning projects, all located in coastal areas of Occitania. First, there is a marine protected area extension project in the Eastern Pyrenees, which implies to discuss with the different users of the sea, Then there is an industrial construction of hydrogen facility in the harbor of Port-la-Nouvelle. It's a controversial project which will require a peaceful dialogue with nearby residents. And finally, we also work with a little coastal city called Marseillan, which is exposed to a significant risk of marine submersion, making necessary to rethink and redesign the coastline there. We are going to experiment new methods and new tools in order to involve citizens more efficiently in planning decisions. For example, during citizens' workshops, we will test innovative processes like participatory mapping or mental flexibility exercises. The main goal remains to develop hybrid forms of participation, blending face-to-face arrangements and digital consultation processes. All these innovations introduced in the AATRE project will be exhibited and replicated in the Living Lab, which could become a demonstrator for local planning actors, for experts, academics, and of course, for citizens. This Living Lab should be an open place where people can have access to information, training, innovative tools and solutions, and debates with policy and decision makers. The agora could allow everybody to be involved in thinking and planning the territory in a dynamic of co-construction. Thank you very much for listening to me. If you have any questions, you can also contact me at this email address.
Thank you, Norélia. Now we're gonna switch to Akis Zarkadoulas, who is in the room with us in Athens. I think I have to turn off my sound. Let's check it.
Now you can hear me? Okay. So, thank you. I am Akis Zarkadoulas. I'm a hydrologist and a civil engineer. And I'm working in a consultancy, in a water management consultancy firm here in Athens. And I will present you the concept of and my main occupation is flood management. And I will present you a concept of the right to permeability and its relation with participatory flood risk management in urban centers. But first, some introductory points. What is flood risk? Flood risk is the expected flood impacts, and it is a function of three interdependent factors: the hazard, the exposure, and the vulnerability. The hazard are the flood itself, which is driven mainly by rainfall and the surface impermeability or permeability. The exposures are the elements at risk, such as population or infrastructure, the elements that are within the floodplain. And the vulnerability is related when the event happens, which is the susceptibility of the above elements related with exposure. How cities affect flood risk? At first, they impose a very high hazard increase due to impermeable surfaces. We have an increase in flood peaks and flood volumes. We have a decrease of time of peak, so we have less time for response measures and evacuation and things like that. And we have a decrease in base flow, so the groundwater is not recharged. And there is some evidence that the cities, due to the change of microclimate, they increase also the precipitation above them. So they increase the rainfall. And of course, we have, in cities, we have a concentration of economic activities and high population inside the floodplain. So this leads to an increase of the exposure and vulnerability. In the future, we have the two drivers. We have the climate change and the socioeconomic development. Due to climate change, it is projected that we'll have an increase in rain intensity, though in Mediterranean region, the IPCC report expects a small reduction in the rainfall intensity. And probably we'll have an increase of peri-urban fires. We will insert more water, more flood water coming inside the cities. And of course, we'll have socioeconomic development. So we'll have increase of urban population, increase of economic activities in floodplains. So this will lead to further hazard, exposure, and vulnerability increase, and so the increase of the future urban flood risks. Coming into the participation issues now, it was recognized that a few decades ago that the floods are highly increased by environmental impacts of urbanization, and in turn, in order to reduce floods, we will have to implement structural measures that in turn they will have important environmental impacts. These are the artificial, mainly in cities, the artificial drainage systems. And of course, it was recognized also that flood mitigation measures in one place may affect flood risk in upstream or downstream places. So it was recognized that a wide range of sectors is affected, and this inserts complexity and uncertainty in the design. So, especially in Europe, we came up with the approach of the integrated flood risk management, which introduced non-structural and soft green measures along with structural measures in the design. It wanted to align the flood risk management with wider environmental issues, in the total concept of integrated water resources management. And of course, the most important thing is that for the first time, it was recognized that stakeholder engagement and the public participation is key for effective flood risk management. And in Europe, this was applied with the flood directive framework. So what is the problematic, and especially with the current approach, especially in the dense urban environments? At first, the flood directive, it is recognized from some scientists that it has not a clear definition for the role of the public. And it also recognized from the application of the first cycle that it was not a real participation of the public. It was probably a pseudo participation, let's say. The second is that the non-structural measures, that they are important though, but in general, they emphasize only on exposure and vulnerability reduction, and the hazard reduction is a little bit forgotten. And finally, the soft measures, when implemented, which are very important in the design though, but when implemented, they do not consider the pre-urban conditions as a reference. So I declare that the current implementation of this integrated design tends to take for granted the highly increased flood hazard due to cities' impermeability. And this has these consequences that urban floods are still treated as surprising events, justifying many times the exclusion of stakeholders from decision-making or even inaction. The second is that after flood disasters, there is a high public pressure demanding immediate top-down and structural solution. And sometimes the other approaches, more participatory, are accused because of the consequences of this disaster. And under this context, it's very difficult to apply FRM strategies into a wider environmental context. So under this problematic, I came up with this concept, the right to permeability, which could be defined as the right of every resident of an urban area for the minimum disruption of the natural water cycle due to urban development, so the environmental services related with the water cycle, such as the flood hazard reduction, could be regained in the urban environment. And the acceptable degree of this disturbance is subject to participatory planning at local level and determines the degree of the application of the right. And I further break down this right as a right to know, a right to object, and a right to participate. A right to know would mean that the public should know the degree of current water cycle disruption compared to pre-urban condition, should know the future degree of disruption due to urban development and climate change, and should know also the potential flood risk reduction from the limitation of the disruption. A right to object would mean the institutionalization of the right, for example, through maximum percentages of impermeable surfaces in the areas, so that every new flood risk related project is subject to implementation of the right and public participation. And the right to participate would mean the active involvement of the public for the determination of the acceptable degree of disturbance and participatory planning for the implementation of every flood risk project in neighborhood units. I did some theoretical application of increasing permeability. This is known in hydrology as a hydrograph for people that are not familiar. In the Kifisos upper basin, which is the biggest river here in Athens, which actually is not quite a river because in its biggest length is covered. I did some calculation for the 20-year rainfall. And so we see that if we increase by 10% the permeability in the impermeable areas of the catchment of Kifisos upper basin, we have a reduction of the peak of 8% and of volume by 6%. But if we apply a 30% permeability increase, we'll have a 21% peak reduction and 16% volume reduction. And this would mean a flood risk reduction and protection of human life and properties. And this would mean directly that all this flood volume which is reduced is inserted into the groundwater, so would have an increase of urban water availability to be used for potable water, as potable water, or in agriculture, or in other uses. And depending the technical implementation of the increase of the permeability, we would have all these synergies with other environmental issues which we confront in cities, from microclimate regulation to biodiversity increase, even CO2 reduction. Some comments about the technical implementation of the increase of permeability. Of course, we concentrate in solutions that were mentioned also before, SUD solutions, sustainable urban drainage systems, nature-based solutions, integrated with green infrastructure, but with an emphasis on infiltration, combined with collection, delay, and storage. And it is clear that in dense urban environments, these technical solutions should be characterized by multifunctionality, non-defensive flood strategies, and a decentralized approach. I present you here just an example which by chance I found some weeks ago, and I found it interesting that in Australia there is a current research in Perth, I think, that by integrating the drainage system with the road trees, due to evapotranspiration now and due to infiltration a little bit, they can reduce the flood volumes by 24%, which is a very important reduction. And some comments also about the socio-political implementation. But first, of course, further research is needed for the shaping of the right and political pressure from movements for its adoption. Then, integration of the right into the national law and under the flood directive framework. Then, as it happened also with the application of the flood directive framework, where for all the areas in the countries of European Union, they were created some flood risk maps and flood hazard maps. I say that also flood maps assuming pre-urban conditions and specific levels of permeability should be created, and along with associated potential environmental services maps. These maps then will be used as a reference for the determination of the acceptable disturbance of the water cycle in municipal level through active involvement of the public, and then in neighborhood unit through participatory planning when an urban drainage project is implemented. The previous process should be considered as a reference. And of course, the acceptable degree of disturbance is subject to change. Some final thoughts. Through this presentation, I say that the concept of the right of permeability would rationalize the complexity of flood risk management by providing a common ground for broader participatory processes in the city. This would happen because of the knowledge of pre-urban condition, which I assume that it shall minimize treatment of floods as surprising events. With the emphasis of permeability on permeability increase as a main flood risk management strategy, mainly to comparable flood hazard reduction with structural measures. I mean, comparable with very tough structural measures. And this emphasis on permeability should permit also the technical implementation of SUDS and natural basin solutions. So this will lead to a stimulation and approval of participatory planning in cities for flood risk management, and will permit the integration of flood risk management into wider environmental and climate adaptation participatory processes. These are some references. This is from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Akis. I will change the sound because I can hear me from there. Okay. 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 Is it okay? Can you hear me? Because I got some delay. Okay, perfect. So we are a little bit late. I cannot. Hello. Hello. Can you hear me now? Sorry for this technical problem. So, okay, we have to be quick. Oh, I can't speak because I have a lot of delay. I don't know. Somebody has the sound on. No? Hello? No, I cannot. It's really strange. Now? Ah, okay, perfect. Okay, sorry. So we got 2 minutes per question because I saw 3 questions. So I will read them, and please be really quick because we have to be prepared for the next sessions in 9 minutes. I'm really sorry for that. Every panelist has got the email of the others panelists, so we cannot obviously have a coffee together and speak, but maybe chat together. So one anonymous question, it's addressed to the second presenter, which is Nesrine. Why there is a specific chevra deterioration after 2011? Any special reason? So this is the first question addressed to Nesrine. Second one is to the final presenter, Akis. In your right to know concepts, how much do people have access to this data? Because in the Asian context where I come from, people have low awareness of these concepts, and even the educated people can't question because data is considered as a privilege. So this is the first question, and I think there is a third one on the chat. Here it's addressed to Nicole regarding the equal literacy project where citizens are able to affect planning or decision making in a more structural way. Is there further suggestions that you can now see a few years on, both in terms of urban literacy and long-term impact? Thank you, from Teresa. So please be really quick. I give you first Nesrine for the answer. Thank you.
2011 is the year of political revolution, and the monitoring system became unstable, and there were a lack of supervision and law control. That's why 2011.
Thank you, Nesrine. And then the second question for Akis, if you're ready, Akis.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Well, it's okay. Yes. Okay. Here in European Union, all this data are, I mean, the current flood risk maps and the current flood hazard maps are open for everyone, to the public. The problem is that this data is not communicated with the public. So if this right to know for the impermeability and permeability and the pre-urban condition is to be implemented, one great issue would be how this data would be communicated with the public at first place. However, the concept of the right implies that this would be a recursive process. Also, it implies a process that the public should demand a little bit this data and this knowledge of the pre-urban conditions compared to the current conditions of the city.
Thank you, Akis. And the last, okay, and the last question for Nicole.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Teresa. It was eco-literacy, meaning ecological literacy, that this particular group, the People's Plan, supported. And the designers really gave their competition money to the community residents, so that community residents could learn about the local ecological conditions. In other words, they paid for their time so that they had knowledge and could respond to their specific climate risks appropriately. As for the second part of your question, it's a really good question. So 3 years later now, the only long-term strategies still active were the ones where funding streams were opened at the time of the participatory design process, and where advisory boards were facilitated by the design team that were comprised of community stakeholders at the time of the participatory design process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. And now, if you want to follow the next session, just stay connected, because I think the next session will start soon. Juliana Muniz Westcote, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you so much. I'm wondering if the other panelists, if they were also made panelists right now. A few of them are in the session, and they're waiting to become a panelist, so they can also share the PowerPoint.
Yeah, so as suggest, we got only 2 minutes break. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nicole, Akis, Nesrine, Norélia, and Efthymia and Alexandra. Thank you very much. I'm really sorry for the quick presentation time and the small discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing your email address. Have a nice conference. I hope you will enjoy the 2.5 days coming now. So Juliana, you can do whatever you want. So we got a 2-minute pause, and
yeah, I'm just trying to find the attendees and make them panelists. I'll see if I can. I don't know if I can make that. I see already Marine and Keith on the, yeah, they're on the attendees, but they're supposed to be panelists. And I think we have the others joining us soon. I put a list of them in the chat, if you can see. So as they appear, that can happen. But I would already start sharing my screen so that we have that here, the start.